the blue curtain. Go behind the blue curtain. Interesting. Right, we're live in both places. And hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
Today we're going to talk about the Gnarlroot from the Everbloom. Before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games. A couple of months ago at this point, I guess it probably would have been 4 months ago, we did sort of like, the patch is out, what do we think of it kind of primer. Last week, we got AotC ahead of the curve in Amirdrassil. What is it fucking called? The Dreaming something? The Dreaming Tree or some shit?
Yeah, hold on, I have a...
It has like a subtitle. Whatever.
Amirdrassil, The Dream's Hope.
The Dream's Hope. Lame name. In Amirdrassil, The Dream's Hope. So here's where we get to go through the whole raid and kind of like talk about our experiences with it.
In the grand tradition of the past 2 expansions.
Yeah, in the grand tradition of we've done this like 5 times before.
Fair. Yeah, well, I mean, before we get into it, what is your overall thoughts on the raid?
My overall thoughts on this raid. There's a lot I like about the raid. But it's actually kind of a letdown, in my opinion, compared to for a final boss raid. This has kind of been the first one I haven't really loved in quite a while, right? I feel like my read, maybe my read on 8 point whatever was a little bit different because I really liked Zereth Mortis and I really liked Fate of the Sepulchre, or I'm sorry, Sepulchre of the first one's Fate of the Sepulchre. What am I talking about? And this has kind of not hit me in like the same sort of place and way. I think that Fyr'alath is a neat boss, and he has some cool mechanics that I do enjoy. But they're sort of kind of like too little too late compared to Raszageth, who I thought was a really truly spectacular kind of end boss, and the boss fight for Raszageth really did feel like a boss fight for like an end boss. If Raszageth and Fyr'alath had swapped places, I think I would have said this is goated, right? This is some of the best stuff. But hey, we can talk about some of those details. So yeah, that's kind of my overall, that it's a little disappointing for the end tier. It probably comes into second place behind Vault of the Incarnates in terms of just like my favorite, raids of this expansion so far, but or not so far, but well, maybe so far, who knows? They could have a new raid. We don't know.
I was gonna say like, so what? So that's your order is Vault of the Incarnates and Amirdrassil and wow, I cannot even remember. Avarice, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I liked Avarice quite a lot, and there's some neat stuff in Avarice that I thought was very fun. But yeah, overall, Avarice was, they're all good raids. Listen, they're all good dogs, okay? But like, somebody has to be rated 13 out of 10, and somebody has to be rated 11 out of 10, okay?
Yeah. No, I feel like I was starting to get tired of this raid faster than the other ones, and I don't know if it's just end of the expansion stuff. Maybe it's just that, like, I mean, we'll get into it individually, but maybe I felt like that the kind of early bosses weren't as compelling. I don't know if I believe that or not, but that's like the thing that's like, I don't know. Maybe it's that like Smolder Run was such like a stopping point, and everything else was like not too bad. But we will get.
Yeah, I also think it has to do with numbers. I think that because is it a 9 boss raid? There's 3 Lairdar, 3 more. 9. Yeah, it's a 9 boss raid versus Sepulchre was an 11 boss raid. N'Zoth was an 11 boss raid, right? Like the end raids tend to be longer, and that just expands the feeling, I guess.
Okay. But, yeah, that makes sense. I also wonder if there's a thing about gearing in here, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's start with our first boss with Gnarlroot, from the Everbloom. Yeah. So what did you think of Gnarlroot?
I think he has some great voice lines. The way that he says, "Till the soil with blood," just like this guy gave the weirdest vocal performance for a WoW boss. That I'm also just like, you know what, buddy? This kind of slaps. This kind of rocks. Um, so I guess that like that's my first thought. Gnarlroot is interesting because he's kind of one of the most impactful first bosses we've seen in a long time. First bosses are built to, I always say this: first bosses are built to fall over, right? Nobody wants to walk into a raid and get walled on the first boss, right? The first boss is built to sort of be simple, straightforward, right? Tuned such that you can defeat it with not all that much trouble. And I guess, um, yeah, I guess that's my like overall sort of opinion on sort of Gnarlroot. The interesting thing about Gnarlroot to me is that there was a lot of gear that came off of Gnarlroot that was very good.
Is that what you mean by impactful? You said he was kind of the most impactful. Like I assume that you don't mean difficulties. I don't think he was that tough to deal with.
Yeah, he definitely was not that tough to deal with. Part of this, I think, is the new way the gearing upgrade system works,
Okay.
which is a system I've lauded. I think it's very good, right? It's a really useful way to kind of make sure that it solves just a number of issues that
Right.
WoW gearing has had for a long time. And there was sort of an evolution on it in this one, but there was one trinket, Gnarlroot's branch or something, that was just it's a really powerful trinket, and then also a weapon that drops off of Gnarlroot that was is best in slot for warriors until you get Fyr'alath, right, the legendary, which I was just like, wow, that's wild that stuff is dropping off of that stuff is dropping off of the first boss. But when everything is on hero track, champion track, all of these sort of tracks, it basically equates all of the loot from the bosses in a way that Razageth didn't, right? Or I'm sorry, not Razageth, Vault of the Incarnates didn't. Vault of the Incarnates had tiered loot, right, where some of the stuff dropped at a little bit higher item level than some of the other stuff did, but there was no upgrade pathing to anything. So naturally, the gear that was dropping off of Razageth, or the gear that was dropping off of Dathia or whatever, like these wing bosses, Kurog, right, were higher item level pieces that were more desirable. And so that was just, I don't know, that was like an interesting kind of just thing.
Yeah. No, that's definitely fair. Yeah. No, I definitely feel that I wonder if there's a deeper thing to go into there. We can talk about that at the end because that's more like systems level talk than is individual boss level talk. I liked Gnarlroot well enough, as a monk player. Anything that gives me an opportunity to do some multi-target damage is going to be one I appreciate. And so I had fun with it. I think I will. What were other first bosses recently? There was the
dragon in Abyss.
Yeah, the dragon in Abyss, and what was the first boss in Vault of the Incarnates?
The fire guy that had Garrosh's voice. And he went to the center of the room to do that like inferno thing, and we would all go and pad our numbers.
Yeah. No, he was the commander of the Draconid forces. Right. Okay, so interesting. Because that opened up with the dragon riding minigame.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah. So this definitely didn't feel like he was much of a pushover as the first one became, right? I feel like the Abyss one
was actually kind of hard. We actually kind of fucked that up. And I actually think I like that boss the best. Out of all the first, I mean, my favorite first boss is not the Tarrasque. What is it fucking called?
The guy from the
Terragru or something. Is that what it's called?
Terragru. Yeah.
That is the best first boss that you can have in one of these things, right? It is an encounter that is just that was super interesting. You got these anima powers, right? It was tied into the lore from the previous patch, right? We're going into the Sanctum of Domination. We're fighting this kind of final boss, right? We're going into the Sanctum of Domination. We're going to fight this final boss. from Torghast that was too powerful for anything, right? I don't know, there's just something so cool about that. I don't know that we'll ever get a first boss that is like that tier of cool in kind of again.
So while I agree with you on kind of like the initial impact of the Terragru, I actually think that he was one that I know the only reason I didn't get tired of him is because he was so easy, right? And like the motivation, at least for me, past kind of like the loot is performance stuff, and Terragru was so fucked from a performance standpoint, right? Like
Oh yeah, because you would get the different anime powers, and yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah.
So I like. It's not that I hated the Terragru. Like if the Terragru was like difficult, I might have hated him because I don't even get the satisfaction of being able to benchmark myself. But I think the thing with the first boss in Aberrus was that it was capable of being screwed up by a single person, which is always rough, right? And so Gnarlroot, while being relatively easy, if someone screwed up their mechanics, you could recover from it, which I think ultimately is good for your later. Like it's not so easy that like somebody can just like kind of like hand over like carry you, like a single person can carry you through it on the first one, but once you get later it's like you can get a little bit sloppy, you can doodle a little, as we say, and get there and still be able to clear the boss. I think that's my sweet spot for early bosses, is like some level of mastery, benchmarkable, but still ultimately doable if that's what the situation calls for. I felt that the Aberrus boss was maybe doable, but if you duded and somebody who couldn't started duding, then the pole would die, which is like not fun.
Yeah, the lasers, I just think the thing of there are these portals and you have to run a laser into a portal is just like, that's a really like neat mechanic.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, and I also like the way that she's an undead dragon that has been resurrected so many times by Deathwing that like her whole mind has been fucked, basically, right? But like as you are fighting her, she is shedding these pieces of her armor and stuff like that. That felt very like thematic to what we were doing. I enjoyed like the lore of it.
Right.
Gnarlroot had interesting lore in the sense of one of the things that you do is you fight with and to protect Gnarlroot. Like there's a quest before entering Amirdrassil where like these Jarden are, I think they're like throwing like ropes over the treants and trying to pull them down, like lumberjacks kind of thing, and you go and you kill all of the primalists with the ropes out kind of thing. And one of the people you do that for is Gnarlroot, right? So it's like, oh, you're going to you save this treant only for him to go into the boss and he's fighting Igira while you're doing all the initial trash. And then Anira like inflects him with Shadow Flame and he becomes like a thing that you have to put him down like old Yeller. Okay. And that's fair enough. That's kind of cool. I actually think that probably the commander from the Vault of Incarnates is the weakest of these, who I'm sort of like interested in kind of the least. I
will agree with that. From like my criticisms of the Aberrus boss are positionally more than kind of like even mechanically or lore wise, right?
I almost sort of feel like Aberrus didn't really have a first boss. It kind of feels like there weren't all that many bosses that just fell over in Aberrus.
Maybe I would say like maybe the second boss on the, no, maybe not. I don't remember.
Like the Zakali Assault, but like we wiped a lot of times on this. Zakali Assault, the Shadow Flame, whatever. I mean, there were certain bosses that we would end up cheesing, right? But like we hit a damage break point on the Forgotten Experiments, I think, where it was like, because we had those, you had to drop so people would get stacks and they would get dispelled, and then people would have to like get other like stacks or whatever, and it was just like a really kind of, or it would spawn an orb and you had to like kill the orb or whatever, and like that was like really hard for our raid to deal with. But we are kind of just like a just cracking heroic level raid group. So
I was gonna say like, I think Aberrus had a lot of kind of like somebody could screw it up bosses, right? Like even like even pre, like because the second boss on that side was Mortal Piss, right?
Mortal Piss, yeah.
And like even and this is not to blame anybody, right? Like we had a substitute tank one time and he just didn't quite understand the mechanics and pulled the bosses together, and and it caused us to wipe. So Yeah. But yeah, so that's Gnarlroot. Gnarlroot, pretty good, right? Like thumbs up. Nothing great, nothing terrible. Igira. How did you feel about Igira?
Agira's probably my favorite boss in the raid. I think we talked about this once when we talked about just our initial impressions. I sort of related how much I loved Igira. Igira, the thing I love about Igira is that she has been sort of established since the very first patch. Right, in the first patch, we meet the Jarden, and you can kind of get through sort of environmental design, this understanding of like, oh, these are essentially giants who bound themselves to these molten runes in order to hunt dragons, and they're dragon killers, right? And in the first patch, you find out that they're looking to find their lost elders, right? Then in 9.1, you find 3 of those elders, one of whom is the guy leading the Zakali assault. One of them is Rashok, right? A boss in the raid. 2 of them are world bosses, right? But there's a missing elder, Igira the Cruel, right? And we don't know where she is or what she's doing. And then it turns out that she's working with the Druids of the Flame to forge, the Shadow Flame axe Fyr'alath, the Dreamrender, for Varek, right? She's referenced in a bunch of the quests and kind of leading up to it. She has item stuff. She's like items that are like named for her or like reference her presence. And so to me, this is a huge kind of storytelling coup. Right? If you are a Vorthos for WoW and you care about the story and you care about the lore, Igira is like the perfect raid boss, right? The kind of person who has been set up slowly and steadily over the course of an expansion so that when she shows up, is kind of like, oh my god, I get it, right? I had the item, Igira's whatever, from before this sort of stuff. And then her boss mechanics I liked quite a lot. Igira as the blacksmith who creates Fyr'alath, her boss fight is about both the sort of like agency of, so just to explain how the boss fight works. At predetermined intervals, she will go to forge a new Shadow Flame weapon, a pair of daggers, a great axe, maybe, and like a sword or something like that, right? She just these 3 different weapons. Can't remember what they are. But the way she does that is that when she is forging her new weapon, you can go stand in certain parts of the arena, and when you stand in those parts of the arena, she forges the weapon based on the number of people that are standing in that part, right? As if she is responding to taunts from the raid to kind of go, "Oh, I'll fight you whatever you want. Let's go," right? And the different weapons have different effects, and you can choose the order in which you do those effects, right? And just all of that really speaks to a bunch of stuff that I thought was really interesting about kind of like the raid and fight design, right? Like our first kills of Igira, I would say were pretty clever, right? We were doing something that was incredibly off meta and off base because we were taking the hardest weapon effect, which were these daggers that she forges for herself and then puts like a huge healing absorb that has to be like bursted off or whatever. And then we were lusting that with our healers, and I was healing at that time. So it was just like, it was one of those things that made it feel like a hero play, right? Where it was just like, oh, the entire raid is on my back in this moment, and I have the power to sort of like, chew through this mechanic in like an interesting and innovative way. And so that kind of stuff, like that felt great. It was maybe my highlight of the whole raid, if I'm being honest. Then we had then there's just kind of like some other more straightforward mechanics, right? It's like, oh, she's gonna jump across the room for certain stuff. Oh, there's like a big tank soak, right? She has these spears, and you have to get the spears close enough that you can AoE the spears down, but not far enough away that like, whatever. Like this is how her stuff worked. And I don't know. I connected to all of that. I thought it was all pretty fun and interesting. So yeah, I guess I liked Igira the Cruel. The one thing about Igira that I hated is we never got good at spears, and I couldn't understand why. No raid I ever raided with got good at the spears. They were either all too close, such that everybody was crowding out the boss, right? Or they were all too far away, and it felt like I had to run to like Timbuktu to like get like DPS down the spears or whatever. The perfect placement for the spears was for people to run their circles up to like her feet essentially, right? Because all the melee are standing on her feet essentially. And just I don't know, nobody could fucking do that shit. It didn't matter. Like this is the kind of thing where like the amount of damage it didn't really matter. Like for most of it, we killed the spears, it was fine or whatever. But it was just like, God, can we please just do this mechanic like perfectly? Because it felt to me, I felt like when I was doing spears, I was like, oh, I know exactly what to do every time, and I did that every time, and nobody else could replicate that.
Yeah, no, I think part of the thing there was that the decision was made at some point. It's like the damage isn't worth avoiding, and it's better to have bigger uptime by pulling the spears in closer. And so, as long as they're not like totally overlapping, we're probably good. I think that's ultimately what happened with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I thought Igira was fine. Did not particularly speak to me. Did not particularly aggravate me in any way. So, I don't got much to say about it other than, kind of like it, I hit buttons, I did damage, right? Like,
I appreciate that she was a boss that as a DPS, I could just tunnel and I didn't do any mechanics. And it was just like, maybe I did do some mechanics in the sense that I moved my feet a little, or I moved my feet a little, or I popped sweeping strikes to cleave onto spears because that's how Arms Warrior deals with spears or whatever. But like at the end of the day, I was just sitting there. I was wailing on a boss, right? There was nothing getting in the way of me doing that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it gave me the opportunity to like maybe punch Touch of Death a little bit early a couple times on the spears, but that's like basically it from my perspective. Yeah, do you want to go fire? Or you want to go green from here?
I guess we can go fire. I think of Volcaros,
yeah.
Yeah. I think of Volcaros as the third boss. Volcaros is interesting because he's such a pushover. I just like, is that boss undertuned or something? It felt like the dog. Do you remember the dog from Aberys, where it was just like, oh, we all just stand on top of each other and it immediately soaks in.
Oh yeah, yeah. You mean the other fireworm, right? Like the three-headed fireworm?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess it was a. I guess I thought it was a dog.
It's swimming around. It's swimming around in the lava, so it's a weird dog if it's a dog.
Yeah, I mean, it is a dog. It's like a little Cerberus, but with like fire Hydra heads. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever. I think like these are both bosses that I feel like have, I guess, failed mechanics, which is to say that I sort of see what the design was going for, and it comes up short, in my opinion. So just like with the dog, for instance, the idea is you're not allowed to get him to 100 energy, and you need to manage the raid such that nobody is granting him too much energy, because soaking the pools gives you stuff that gives the dog energy. But what we basically found is that if everybody just insta soaks the pools, you spread it perfectly evenly, and it's so easy to execute that mechanic, right, that nobody ever gets high enough stacks of, I guess it was like a dot, and I think it's when the dot ticks he gets energy and he needs to get 100 energy. But like, if you spread or maybe it's something like that, it's just like if you spread that dot out to 1 billion people and also everybody's DPSing down the boss, like you just never even get close to letting him fill up his energy bar, right? And so to me, that's sort of like a failed boss. He had this whole set of mechanics that I was essentially completely ignoring. I was like fundamentally uninterested in. Volcaros, I don't think that Volcaros was a failed boss in the sense that the mechanics were there was no mechanic that was like truly failed in the way that that stuff with Magmarax, I think is what his name was failed or whatever. But the mechanics are less than the sum of their parts, right? Volcaros had the tail, which is like interesting and iconic. I actually like the idea of this worm that's swimming around in the lava, the lore of Amirdrassil, where Smolderon is trying to merge, the Firelands and the Emerald Dream at the same time, right? Like that's cool, and it's cool that this like fire worm exists and he wants to eat the world and all this other sort of stuff or whatever. But just like, I don't know, there was just not a lot to this boss that felt flavorful or interesting. None of the mechanics really seemed to like interact with one another, except for I guess the fire like pushing you around the circle. And maybe if the boss was tighter tuned, maybe if this was tuned like Sludge Fist, right? Sludge Fist was a simple boss that had extremely tight tuning, right? Such that it felt like we were in a race where every point of DPS matters materially, right? Volcaros never felt that way, right? You know, like the only reason we would fail the DPS check for Volcaros is if like one side died, right?
Yeah.
Or like, you know, all of the stuff bled out. You know, and so I don't know, like this isn't a cohesive boss. It doesn't really fit together. There's not really any like like grasp, or like, you know, tune into. So I was mostly just sort of disappointed, if I'm being honest, with Volcaros as a boss experience.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's nice just to have a boss that dies, right? Like that you don't have to, think too hard about. And so I'll give it that. Like,
Yeah,
um,
true.
he feels like a filler boss, but that's okay, I guess, right? Like, not super hard to deal with, but it is kind of like a run around, neat little arena, right? Like, not a lot of kind of like you said, right? Like this is a boss that doesn't have kind of like a one person can fuck it up for everybody mechanic, which is nice. Um, well, he didn't stand out to me as being like, yeah. I mean, as I'm looking at this, like maybe I'd have. I think it's a tie between him and maybe like, maybe it's either Nimue or Smolderon for my least favorite boss of the raid. And he's just because he's boring, right? Like the other two I have like maybe particular issues with that we'll talk to when we get to them. But
Okay.
but Volcaros is just kind of like, okay, whatever. Like let's spank and tank him, and spank and tank with the twist being that like you have to go in two directions and there are two groups instead of one, and that can be a fun to do every once in a while. It's also he's a great boss for benchmarking, right? Because it's like almost pure rotation, right? Like it's all about those little
There's a very
optimizations.
little that you're gonna get off the boss for, right?
Yeah,
Even when you're soaking, you can still walk to the boss, right? And all that stuff. So
and it's all also kind of like regular, right? Like something that like from for somebody who likes to benchmark himself is like if we're on Fyr'alath, right, and I get hit with the mechanic that I have to bring the bomb out of the group, right? Like any of those bosses where it's like I have a mechanic and I have to take downtime because I'm going to do a mechanic. It's like my performance is going to be heavily affected by that. Same thing happens with Nimue a bunch. Whereas Volcaros just doesn't have any opportunity for that to happen, which is nice at some level. Like it's a boss I can benchmark. It's a boss that I can like benchmark my own performance by week to week, and not have to worry about like in fight variations, which I enjoy. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did he have any interesting loot for you? Igira didn't have anything super interesting when it came to loot, and neither did Volcaros. But maybe there's something about
Let's say Igira's hatchet was a weapon I ended up using for a while because it was like a nice early kind of raid. Nice early raid one-handed weapon. I do not see the loot on here. I have a thing. I guess it's the Ouroboreal necklace. I guess is supposed to be a big thing, but I don't know. There's the loot guide table. Sorry, I am trying to look at this simultaneously. But Volcaros, what does Volcaros drop? Leather wrists, which I don't use because I built my own leather wrists. Leather hands. The necklace.
That necklace is like interesting, but like it is unlike the fire jewelry from Vault of the Incarnates was really good because you could trigger it and it was really useful all the time. Right? You could trigger it with like either you're playing a spec that does fire damage, or you could like get a crafted item that does fire damage or whatever. The Ouroboreal necklace, it's like, okay, well, it's only absorbing nature damage, so or fire damage. So it's like how it feels like a neutered version of that, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I used the Coiled Serpent Idol for a while, just because it like fit in, and that had like I liked seeing the serpents pop up and like murder things occasionally. The show's world questing, but that's about it. Um,
Okay.
Shall we move on to Larry, our
Yeah,
favorite.
Larry, big Larry.
So I actually enjoyed Larry quite a bit. He could be frustrating in terms of like getting things right and like it always felt bad because the tanks would drag him out into the wilderness to like and be like no I
Yeah.
can't anymore, and then I feel like people got into fights over picking up the orbs because they gave you a buff, but you know it felt
Yeah, I
like
just want to say for the record, low kicks, our tank getting an orb is like the dumbest thing. Tanks don't need any of that, right? Like it is materially bad for the lowest, like for a tank to be picking up a DPS or healing amp in the same way that a DPS or healing could pick up that amp. But who knows? Low kicks is a particularly good player and a particularly jack tank, so maybe just because he is a good player, it was like worth
I
it
was
for
gonna say,
him.
in fairness to low kicks, given our raid composition, right? Like, there are worse people it could have gone to that are like dedicated DPS.
Mm.
Um, that being said, I feel like there was a lot of like passive aggression going on around. It's like, oh, I guess you got the orb. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I was planning to pick up that orb, but that's fine. That kind that's pretty common. That was definitely real.
um, but yeah, no, but like I actually, he is. I thought Larry was complicated enough to be fun, right? Like that they were like, but it was like, oh, like the final phase where like these treants walking, it's like, oh man, we have to deal with them. It's like either a paralyze or a ring of peace for me, or this is all from my perspective, right? Or like a touch of death, right? Like ways to help people to help deal with them, right? And it's like, and it's all closing in, and so it feels like it gets very hectic towards the end. Um, I didn't play a lot of the mechanics in the early part. I think you did. How did you find like the fire hose and whatnot?
Oh, I loved all that stuff. This is one of those bosses that is it reminds me of um Broodkeeper Diurna from Vault of the Incarnates,
Mm.
who maybe no, I think Taros was my favorite from Vault of the Incarnates, right? That stone boss. He's just such a good boss. But the Broodkeeper is a fight that allows a choice number of people to really shine. And it's not because they DPS, it's not because they do whatever. It's because they just excel at doing like an important mechanic when that important mechanic comes up. I think of this as sort of the fourth role in a way. Or maybe a fifth role, right? You would say you have tank, healers, and then melee and range DPS. These are the four different like roles. There's kind of a quiet role or like a sub role that any of those can pick up, which is this idea of like the mechanics doer, right?
Right.
The person who does the mechanics, right? In Diurna, these were the people who were drawing the staff lasers through the eggs and popping eggs at certain periods in order to do certain like certain things, right? So that was me, that was Sarian, that was Raylan, right? In Castle Nathria, it was the person who was turning the vats on that one that one boss. For most of that boss, we were all just standing on the thing, but there was one person who was emptying and lowering the anima tanks, right?
Or the
And it's
seed
just like,
carriers during the artificer fights.
yes, absolutely. The seed carriers during the artificer fights. Yeah, that perfect. That's a great example. And I think that this fight had a lot of that, right? Both in the sense of, you had the person who is doing the fire hose, right? But also just in the sense of healers have a mildly different mechanic, or part of the mechanic of you have to heal a thing to full just kind of allows for interesting kind of like interactions. You can have DPS who decide, oh, I'm gonna off heal a little bit because getting the tree up is like a whole thing. I worked so hard to get those trees. Those trees had the most addicting mechanic for me, which was they have a certain amount of max health, and their max health decreases. Okay. As they like spend into the seed, they're draining their max health. They're not draining their actual health, right? It's their maximum health. And the reason why is because they are taking all of the damage that the raid is taking, right? So when the thorns get under their feet, they take the damage from the thorns just like a raid member would. At first, that stuff's not dangerous because their max health is very high. right? But as they drain themselves into the seed, their max health gets lower and lower and lower, such that any hit will basically like chunk the shit out of them. But if you're a good healer and you can top them off between that and their next hit, you can actually keep those trees alive for a very long time and really supercharge the seed. And it was just like, that was like the perfect mechanic to get me to love healing those trees, because like I was focused on them. It felt very core to the fantasy of playing a healer, right? Just all of that stuff really like worked for me, kind of like gangbusters. I'm actually kind of surprised in a way to sort of say this, because I have just said that like Igira is my like favorite boss in the raid, but Igira is my favorite boss in the raid because I think that there's all this extra stuff around like her lore. There really isn't that with Larodar, right? But just like on a mechanical level, there's a lot to love about Larodar, and he is kind of the perfect boss in the. He is not. He is maybe not the best boss in the raid. In the sense that he doesn't do the most, but he's kind of the perfect boss in the raid. I have no critiques for Larodar. I think the experience is perfect. He is just as hard as you want an end wing boss who drops tier to be, right? Without being so hard that he feels like a wall, right? Like we had a real night or two of true progression on Larodar, right? But he didn't just like completely wall the shit out of us in the way that other, like other bosses kind of did. And so all of that makes me like Larodar quite a lot.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that. Something I want to point out there too is that like there are those like mechanics that like like I'll call them hero mechanics, just for lack of a better term. And the thing that makes them like feel really good is that they're chosen roles, right? Like when this is the flip side of kind of like the somebody can fuck it for you. The way you get somebody can fuck it for you is like, obviously a hero role player can drop their thing, but usually they're pretty in tune with it, and that happens less often. When it's randomly assigned to somebody and that person just like, for whatever reason isn't particularly in it or good with it, or like maybe just hasn't happened to see it, that feels really bad when a raid wipes, because it's like, if it's the person's fault directly or not, or like, blame, it's just kind of like, well, we lost because the dice rolled wrong, right? Whereas on the other side, but when you can choose to do it, it feels better, at least.
Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff, especially in the third. Part of what I love about Larodar is the that I think of it as like modulation. You know how like a song will modulate into like a more intense key for its like final verse chorus or whatever after the bridge kind of thing. This is sort of what is going on in Larodar's fight. He gets to 35% and he's like, oh baby, like listen, the music ramps up in the back. It doesn't actually. I wish it did. God, could you imagine if WoW had music like that? Like the music ramps up in the background and everybody's like getting really hyped because like this is like the moment. This is the time. You have to kill the boss because it's getting like more and more dangerous. You have that encroaching, fire circle coming in and all this other sort of stuff. And I think about the soaks in that phase. Very, very simple mechanic, right? We've seen this a million times. Stand in the circle. One person takes damage. If nobody stands in the circle, everybody takes damage, right? It's really bad. But it's like, this is the perfect play. This is the perfect design to make hero plays, because you'll get a soak in the goop and somebody just kind of, because they like go out in suicide in order to like catch a ball or something. And it's just that like that stuff feels so good. Stuff feels so good in the moment. Yeah, I don't know. So that's a lot of where my head is at when it comes to all this.
Yeah, no, I will absolutely agree with that. Larodar, very solid boss. I'd say he's probably my second or third favorite boss of the fight of the raid. Yeah. All right, well let's switch over to the Green Wing. We've got our council fight, which is Council of Dreams, which I also enjoyed a bit. Like initially a little disappointing because it's like a council fight, but I don't get to do my multi-target stuff. It's like I guess in Castle Nathria, I could multi-target to pad my numbers, even if that wasn't effective. But like here it's like you can sometimes multi-target, but it's just kind of like not the way you position in the fight. It just like doesn't happen that often. But I thought it was a very a fight that felt fun and felt like to your point, it felt cohesive as a fight, right? Like the different mechanics for the different characters felt like they belonged. With the exception of maybe Puck's like shield degenerate thing. Like that one didn't feel particularly thematic, but the ducks felt great. So I'm willing to forgive like a one kind of like half miss maybe.
If I could channel my characters, Jean Hao's favorite fight in this raid would be the Council of Dream, because the thing that is, it's true. You can't multi-target those unless you are playing a ranged DPS spec that specifically has the ability to multi-target as long as the requisite dot is on a target, right? So the way Elemental Shaman works, specifically with this tier set, is when you use an ability that has a 45-second cooldown, but every time you hit with a lava burst, that reduces by 1 second. It's in practice more like kind of like 30 to 10 or 15 seconds kind of thing. The next 3 lava bursts you do will hit every target affected by your flame shock within 40 yards. Okay, so as long as you are within 40 yards of all 3 bosses, your lava bursts are cleaving to all 3 of those bosses at any individual time. And because those lava bursts are reducing the cooldown of Primordial Wave, the thing that makes your next 3 lava bursts cleave, right? And those lava bursts can overload, which is the shaman mechanic that says that when their spells cast, they can overload and cast again at 50% efficiency, but 50% of a lava burst is still lava burst damage, right? Just checks for yes, no damage, right? So that's another second off the thing. Basically, it meant that every time I cast lava burst, every time I cast Primordial Wave, I instantly got to shave, I guess it would be 18 seconds off the cooldown or whatever. And then you're just filling with lava burst in the meantime, obviously. And that shit is so fucking fun. It is hard to describe how fun it is, because you have an ability that's a really fun ability that makes your next abilities even cooler. You watch the meatballs fly to all these different bosses in the raid, and it's reducing the cool, and that just like that synergy is like so fucking addictive. And there are no bosses like this. No bosses work this way, right? You either have just like straight cleave, or you have this like split effect. But there's actually 2 of them in this season. One is the second boss in the Everbloom functions this way, and the other is the Emerald Council, whatever, the Council of Dreams functions this way. And it's just, God, it's so fucking fun. Because the part of the way the tier set is tuned is that it is tuned that it is supposed to feel good on single target. So when you are doing it on multiple targets, it feels amazing, right? And all you have to do is keep up your flame shocks on all these targets, all this other sort of stuff. And so, man, I would do that fight for the rest of my life on this version of Elemental Shaman if I could. It is so addictive. I can't explain how fun it is, but it's just like a quirk of the mechanic, of just how this, like, you could really kind of key into it by setting up your character in this one particular way. So yeah, I guess that's how I feel about Council of Dreams. On Baron, I sort of hated Council of, because I also do the thing, but part of it is that I want up, sweeping strikes uptime, right? Sweeping strikes is you're on and off, and so like sweeping strikes is crazy on Fyr'alath when you get those 2 colossals right next to each other, and I can just sweeping strikes them for 15 seconds, right? Like that's like perfect. That's exactly what I want, kind of thing. But it was just like, because they're like running all around the boss room, it's very hectic, it's very chaotic. Also, shout out to Urktos's Claws, the most simple mechanic of all time that killed so many fucking people. Holy frijoles. What a lethal boss ability, right? Just this simple cleave. I actually think it's actually very clever. This is a very good mechanic in the sense that it's the kind of mechanic we've seen a million times, right? Oh, the tank buster is a big cone. Don't stand on the tank. But because the characters are moving around all the time, and you're constantly trying to position Urktos onto a cleave target, and the tank buster comes out at very irregular intervals, right? It doesn't always come out on sort of cooldown. It comes out in a very kind of like bop ba da da bop, like weird, fucking sandwalk, rhythm or whatever. It was just the kind of mechanic that an inattentive tank would go, oh shit, and just murder everybody because they happen to be pointing Urktos at the melee group by accident. And like, I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's phenomenal. There's a bunch of people who are annoyed dying to something so fucking simple, but I think its simplicity is its elegance in this instance.
I agree, right? Like it's combining a simple thing with this kind of like the hecticness inherent in a boss fight. Again, the other thing I really like is in this fight is kind of like the three bosses having abilities that like interrupt each other, right? Like you charge Arctos into what's her nuts, and then
Yeah.
and then you use the duck song to calm down Arctos, and then I guess you break.
You use the goop on the ground that Erwin is summoning to break your pip shield. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think that one's probably the weakest of the bunch, but ducks are a fun mechanic. Everything's a fun mechanic, right? Although I will say I got ducked unnecessarily a couple times. I was just like, why are you deducking right next to the boss?
Yeah, I guess.
So something that's interesting is that like, and maybe this is just because the way it has to be but like, it seems like everybody in the raid was very kind of like anal about the boss is almost dead. You need to stop DPS right now. It's like we never even got close to them getting back up. Like it never felt like a huge problem to me. But maybe it's
the kind of thing that I feel like people read that it starts regenerating. You have to, but like the reality is their generation cast is like 45 seconds. You have plenty of time in order to make this work. I don't know, maybe I'm just gonna be like one of the Mythic Plus bosses this season has a similar mechanic. He has 3 totems that are healing him, and you have to kill them all at the same time, because if you kill one of the totems, it reanimates. But the reanimation cast is 10 seconds. Okay, so you have to kill all of the totems within 10 seconds of each other. I have fucked up that mechanic up like I don't know, maybe 20 times over the course of this season. How many times have I run that dungeon, right? We have fucked that mechanic up so many fucking, right? I never worried about the Emerald Dream or the Council of Dreams version of it, not once.
Yeah, no, I have fucked that totem mechanic up as well. Like the few weeks that I've done like the level 0s, it's like 5 people who don't know what they're doing, just kind of like, huh, well, we killed it. Oh no, right? Like, but
yeah,
yes.
one of the things is that we unlike that total mechanic or whatever, like dots will push it over, right? Like I'll have rend, I'll have deep wounds or whatever, and that stuff will just crack it to the other side. It is what it is. Okay. What about loot? Did you got a pips?
I got a pips badge on normal at some point. I'm not currently running a pips badge. I know it's probably everybody's best thing or something, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a meme in Patrick's server about the pips badge, where everybody says, oh, but pips is my bis or whatever. The pips is interesting. I don't have pips on any of my characters, even though it is like theoretically so good. I don't know, I've just never really I just sort of don't like a stat stick like that. I kind of want my trinkets to do stuff. The more I play WoW, the more I want my trinkets to do stuff, and the more I kind of feel like a good on use trinket is sort of better than a bad passive trinket, right? Or than a good passive trinket in a lot of scenarios. And even if I sort of like, I don't know, I just sort of care about that stuff a little bit more now. So I have never been a pips gamer. But who knows? Maybe next season, right?
Yeah. I'm not too worried about it either way. I don't know. I also felt like individual loot from individual bosses. Like I was always a little bit like weird about like paying attention to individual loot from bosses, but it felt like, this season and last season in particular, it felt like, well, it doesn't really matter because if I care enough, I'll just take the thing I get and turn it into a thing I want, right? Like the trinkets, I guess, and the weapons are different in that way, but
yeah, people are pulling stuff out of the vault, obviously.
I don't think I did not get Tira out of a heroic boss kill. I either got a normal thing and transformed it, or I pulled that out of my vault. Just because like, it was so high priority, right? Like it's like, well, I've got 2 charges, I'm going to get 2-piece, right? Like
Yeah.
All right. How did you feel about Nimue? Because she was. bottom of my list, but for idiosyncratic reasons, I think.
I think I like the idea of Nimue more than I liked the execution of Nimue. Nimue, I think, actually was really good, except it had like one. It was tuned just a little aggressively, in my opinion. Kind of the opposite problem of Boss. I actually think that if Nimue was tuned a little bit more, it's actually it's like it's just like one too many flowers spawned in all of the phases is maybe what I would say. So I guess maybe that's what I would say about
My big thing is that I think they should have made the threads a different color. Like the whole fucking arena is green, and you have these green threads like coming
Oh, I
over that'll
see.
stun you for 15 seconds. And not that they were super hard to. It's just like I wouldn't think about it, and I'd like stop paying attention for like half a second, and then this green thing would roll over the green field and hit me and stun me for 15 seconds or however long it was, right? Like, um, and that always like that was aggravating to me. And then on top of that, the fight was like execution heavy, let's say. Um, and you know, and so many things could go, like three things you just go like wrong in little ways, right? Like, or like I found out the hard way that like you could get bounced off the backside of the arena if you were past the wall, right? Like, and just little things like that that felt more like frustrating than meaningful, right? Like, and like I don't know, I I I feel like there's got to be like something behind this, like maybe the mechanics are truly random, but it always feels like I get like mechanics, either get mechanics or I don't for a fight, if that makes sense, right? Like if I'm getting a mechanic, it feels like I'm getting it all
Three
the time.
times.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, I feel like I never got the bombs. I maybe the bombs would be something I would do. Maybe there would maybe be two changes I would make to. One would be if you're standing in a flower, if you are soaking a flower, you're immune to this stun.
Yeah,
Just something like that, right? As sort of like a like the stun is really lethal if you are moving between flowers, but if you're in that flower, you're good, kind of thing, right? And it would probably create some frustrating moments, right? Like, you know, imagine a sour gets, you know, you're sitting in a flower, it's soaking, you watch the thing come to you, and then the flower soaks and the thing hits you and it stuns you a bunch or whatever. Like that would obviously kind of like suck, but to me, that kind of stuff is just kind of like, you know, inbuilt whatever, right? The frustrating part of Nimue was the threads coming out, and specifically at range, the threads are so wide because they get
yeah,
wider as they come. They're so wide that you have to do all this, you know, stuff to in order to get around them. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I was
I
doing.
would
It's
say
funny because like
whenever I had to drop a bomb, coming back in dealing with the threads was the worst.
yeah, yes, that's super true. Yeah, I liked the, you know, the on off kind of, you know, up down. You have your uptime on the boss, and then it's the phase where you're fighting the ancient. Like that stuff to me was pretty fine. I was having a good time with all of that, but yeah, I don't love Demo.
Yeah,
Uh,
it also has this like again, this is like you know teamwork problems, right? Um, but like there would be situations where it's like we fought the ancient. There are flowers to soak. I will stand and help soak the flowers. The ranged will go run back and start DPSing the boss while I'm soaking the flowers. It's like you should be standing here, and I shouldn't. But I'm not gonna like you know leave the flower and let us like you know fail
yeah,
the
and like sitting there and trying to convince you to do the thing would waste more time than if I just do it. Like
yeah
that is definitely frustrating. It's funny because that's the flip side of like it's the flip side of the personal responsibility wipes the raid. I just don't think that happens. This is a very good fight for personal
right
responsibility, right? A player who dodges all the threads, who soaks the flowers appropriately, who, you know, manages their stacks about moving from one side to the other. These are all personal responsibility things where like a person just kills themselves, right? But there is sort of the added, you know, kind of optimization responsibility, right? Like how are we optimizing our sort of like output? Are we able to do stuff? And I think that stuff reaches a critical mass that ends up wiping the raid, right? That when enough players don't pay attention to their own health pools, they stack up 3 of the whatever, they kill themselves or they get hit by the threads and then kill themselves, right? You know, then you don't have enough DPS in order to finish the boss, right? And that's when it feels bad.
yeah no you know yeah no I will say that there are times when it feels like the people whose best contribution to the raid would be soaking pools, are the ones that don't do that, right? But I think that's me just like wanting to be more than being super fair. I think most people on our raid are actually pretty good about stuff. It's just kind of like an absent-mindedness thing sometimes. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to say about Nimue before we move on to Smolderon?
I don't think so.
All right.
I don't think so.
All right, Smolderon,
yeah.
the wall. He is the real wall of this raid, I think.
Yeah, people said he's the hardest boss in the raid. I don't think I think that's true, but I understand why they say it. I think he is the most I don't know, sort of mechanically demanding. It's sort of like if all else is equal, I suppose. It feels like the mechanics of Smolderon are going to kill more people than the mechanics of any other boss in this raid. Does that make sense? That's kind of my position.
Yeah, I think part of it is I think this is maybe why I don't like him so much, is that it's a lot of it comes down to the randomness of the mechanics that make things less reliable, and I think that's what makes it not necessarily harder, but that lack of consistency is what leads to more wipes, is maybe the way to put it. And that's I think you could say that makes him the hardest boss of the raid, and I think under that definition maybe he is. But like, you know, like lining up for the fire things, right? Like they never come out quite exactly as you think they're going to come out, like that little burst, right? And then you have to draw the fire pools to the right space, but things are so hectic that it's not always quite right, like stuff like that, right? Like that, where like things just go a little bit wrong and it really kind of screws up stuff, and it's not hard, if that makes sense, and that I think screws things up. Also, like, because it's so random, right? It's like it's not like you can divide into groups. The first group is group one, go drop your things off on the side. Group two, you do it. You have to respond in the moment and be like really on top of your shit, and make sure you're hitting everything, right? Like,
yeah, this is also, I think this is the most frustrating boss in the raid, and the reason why, especially for our group, is it particularly preys on some of the weaknesses to the way that our raid is constructed. Because our raid is kind of I would almost call it like bimodal or something, right? You have a number of performers on sort of the bottom end who are just, they're there for a good time, right? They're not gigajack DPS players. They're going to show up, they're going to do their job, right? But like they're not going to push insane sort of like numbers, right? They're friendly, they're fun to hang around with, happy they're there because they're a good time, but at the end of the day, they're not sort of like the ones who are like killing bosses, right? And then you have the top end, and the top end is people like me or Dave, right, who are pushing incredibly high-end Mythic Plus keys, so we're walking into the raid with already bissed out DP, like stats, essentially, right? And then part of our fun in the raid is just carrying a whole boss, right? Like, when I play Igira the Cruel, when I do Igira the Cruel on Baron, and I do 20% of the whole raid's damage on my one character in a 20-person raid, that shit feels awesome, right? The reason this is such a frustrating thing is because it combines these kind of highly lethal but highly avoidable mechanics with a DPS timer, right? Like with that it is both a boss that is designed to kill you and a boss that is designed to be DPS'd down before a very tight enrage timer, right? Which is why he's so frustrating. Dave basically wanted to quit the raid over this, right? And I don't blame. I understand exactly where he's coming from, right? Because to my eyes, the tornadoes are such an easy mechanic. I don't know why. I love mechanics like this. I feel really good at mechanics like this, even though I did die to the tornadoes a couple of times. That absolutely has happened, right? But the reason I die to the tornadoes is because my focus gets pulled to something, like to something else, right? Whenever I am in the middle of it and everything's fine and I'm not like stressed or worried, or there's nothing else going on that's like pulling my attention, I watch the tornadoes and I instantly do this, like, I don't know, fucking like math in my head to triangulate where all of them are going, and I just make one little adjustment in order to dodge the tornadoes in this. kind of thing, right? So I'm never dying to tornadoes. But the people who aren't good at that die to tornadoes every single time. And they die the first set. The first set of tornadoes goes out and like 2 people die. And you're just like, fucking Christ. And it's the same 2 people, right? And so you're in this situation where your best players are not enough to carry that fight to completion because it is a tight enrage timer, right? But your worst players are dying all the time to this mechanic that your best players think is trivially easy. Dave used to say, I could RP walk out of these tornadoes, which is true. Like they're very slow. You can see the way that they're moving. Once they're moving, it's kind of like in a kind of like bullet hell sublimation way. You can kind of intuit the direction to move in order to not get hit or whatever. But just like, man, that's like such a frustrating thing to deal with.
I would say I think that RP walking out of the tornadoes would actually help. Like I think it would help me if I actually just RP walked out, because like I always try and like cheat the edge by like dragon punching, or not dragon punching, but like serpent kicking, like, or like roll, or cheat torpedoing. It always gets me in trouble. Honestly, the thing that helped me the most was I found a weak aura that like basically turned on the particle effects for exactly that fight. I could actually see which direction they were going. Like it's very hard to see it with the graphics turned up. So, at least that was
I also hate the pools. The other part of this, I don't actually. I think the pools don't matter, but when I talk about stuff pulling my focus, it's people complaining about the pools. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In Sludge Fist, you have a similar thing. You have a timer. The timer is based on he does a mechanic, you run him into a pillar, right? That's the timer. The pillars are in the same fucking spots, right? They're in the same spots. They will always be in that arena, right? And you take him to each of the 4 pillars. If Smolderon just cut a piece of the pizza pie off, instead of doing flame pools, right? Let's just say he did a big slice and a quarter of the boss arena was covered in lava, right? That would actually be more room than you are currently denied by the lava pools. But no one would fucking get in my ear about it, right? No one would ever say, guys, those lava pools are in a really bad position or whatever. And like, just pull my focus enough that I get whacked by a tornado and die. And that to me is the reason that the pools are so fucking frustrating. There was one night, I don't remember this, but for some reason, we just did Smolderon like the night before Christmas, okay? It was quiet as fuck. And I think we killed it because nobody was talking. Everybody could just sit and focus, right? And that kind of let me, I almost want to like make a thing out of this and be like, let's shut the fuck up during polls, please. Right? Like, there are some mechanics we need to call out and some mechanics we don't, and it's fine, right? We just have to like go with it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like complaining about the pools doesn't make the pools not bad.
Yeah,
right?
it does not retroactively make the pools go to a better location. And that's the other thing, is that it also creates this feeling of like, I don't almost call it like anxiety in the raid that I think is like unfun, right? Because it feels as though you're getting yelled at for not doing the mechanic, but like, honestly, I feel like everybody's doing the fucking mechanics, right? When the pool is out of position is because the tank is moving the boss to position and the pool chose the tank who has to be out of position to move the boss. And it's just like, there's nothing you can fucking do about that, right? But yelling at the whole raid and going, hey, actually the pool, hey guys, we really need to clump for those pools. It's like, yeah, well, nobody did anything wrong. Everybody understands how the fucking pools work. We don't have to talk about this. Anyway, this is part of why I find Smolderon to be very frustrating, I guess.
I also have like a couple of like very stupid little things here too, which is like, for me, like I'd say like 75% of the time that I was trying to bait a pool, I also had that debuff on that when I got healed, I would like drop like the non-permanent pool. It's like, well, I probably shouldn't be standing in the middle of everybody, and then the pool would like drop. Not quite right. Also, this is very, very me specific. If there were like when he's in the middle and doing his kind of like rings, right? If the 2 melee rings are full and I chi torpedo out and there's a gap and then there's one past it, it will like roll right into like, it'll like roll over the safe gap. And so it's just kind of like, oh, right? Like, I more than once I have like rolled out of the bad pool into a second bad pool and died. It's just like, fuck me, right? But like, that is very specifically, me taking Chi Torpedo than anything else.
Yeah, I also think any of these mechanics where those first 2 rings are just fuck that designer. Okay. The designer who was like, and you know what? Every once in a while, the first 2 rings will be full and all of the melee have to come off the boss, makes me want to like throw somebody off a bridge. It's like, you remember I complained about this so much with Stone Legion Generals. Stone Legion Generals had that mechanic where the boss threw a shuriken, it bounced between 2 people and then hit herself, and anybody within 8 yards got a bleed, right? So every 15 seconds, all of the melee had to back off of the boss while that shuriken came in, right? And it was the most aggravating thing. And the reason why is because, like, I'm trying to do my rotation and being in the groove with that, right? Doing my rotation. It's okay if there's a mechanic that makes me walk out, right? Like a bomb on Nimue that makes me take it out into range. Okay, fair enough, right? Yeah, like, yeah, I'll take the DPS loss, 20 seconds. I have to run this thing out or whatever, right? But just like the little hiccups are so fucking annoying. Like that it just pisses me off to no end. Ah,
yeah. All right. Well, we're in the stroke shift here. How did you feel about what's this second last Tindral? How did you feel about Tindral? Might be my favorite boss of the raid.
Really? Okay, interesting. Yeah, Tindral I thought it was a good boss. It is doing the thing that I always love, right? I love I always talk about this. Whenever a boss is archetypal, right? It is like, here is a WoW archetype that and what it would look like to turn that into a boss. Kurog, Grim Totem, was that for shamans, right? He is a shaman, like pulled up into being a raid boss. I thought that was really cool. Kel'Thuzad is a lich. He is a lich, and he's pulled up into being a raid boss, and he does all this fucking lich shit that's super cool. There's a bunch of these over the years, right? And I always go, this is my favorite boss of the raid, because there's just something about that I find to be like so interesting, and I get like interesting and compelling, I guess. Tindral is one of these bosses. He's good. He's fun. He's not quite as good as I kind of want him to be in a way. I don't really know how I would design him differently, but like, he is a druid who does stuff, like based on the form that he's in, kind of just felt cosmetic in a way to me. And I don't really know how to solve that, problem. I think it's because like I'm used to one, I guess I'm used to one boss. I don't really know how I want to phrase this. It's just like bosses naturally have phases where they do different moves. Do you know what I mean? And they never change forms to do that. So when Tindral is changing between his Boomkin form and his Treant form or whatever, in order to be using, the Treant form he does seeds, and the Boomkin form he does lasers or whatever. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like, bosses do shit at weird intervals all the time, so it doesn't feel like it's tied to the form. It's not like he has a completely different move set.
Sure.
He's still doing half of the moves that I care about. He's Mass Entangle thing, or whatever. He's doing the, dispels and shit like that. And so I don't know. Really, what I think I would have wanted from Tindral was I would have wanted a boss who starts in bear form, and the fight is like Urktos, right? One of these like melee powerful bosses, right? Then he goes to Moonkin form, and all of a sudden it's like swirlies on the ground. You're dodging beams and starfalls, and he's putting out moonfires and sunfires, and then he goes to the and is putting out the like the seeds or whatever. I felt like each of those forms needed to be unique, rather than having this shared group of mechanics that he's doing all the time, and then having each form be one mechanic. That's kind of my thing for Tindral. But otherwise, he's fine. He's maybe my like third or fourth favorite boss. He's probably my fourth favorite boss after Laerdar and Fyr'alath.
So I think the thing that I really latched onto that I really liked is I like boss fights with a lot of like basically just like a lot of distance moved in them, right? Like you've got the flying between platforms thing in this one. Help make it feel the boss fights feel really epic to me, right? Like I really like Calandris. The only one I didn't particularly like is Sylvanas, and that's just because it went on for fucking ever. But in theory, I think I think
Sylvanas with a different phase 3 we all probably would like. Let's say we did Sylvanas.
I think Sylvanas with a different phase 2. I would have liked.
Oh, really?
because I think phase 2 is too long. It's not particular, and it's like it's because essentially phase 2 is platforming, right? Like that's the thing that like hurts a lot of people, and that's the part that feels long, right? If phase 2 was just kind of like another platform fight, like it takes too long to get to phase 3, and you don't get to it enough. And it actually, I think this will lead into something about the reason why I don't like Fyr'alath quite as much. I'll just say it here. Phase 2, I think, ends up being the like actual like wall phase, and so that feels bad, right? Because you can't get to the third phase enough to practice it. In Fyr'alath Fest, I think the phase 3 is actually not is easier than phase 2. It just requires like specific execution. And I think that makes that boss feel worse, because phase 3 is like, you want phase 3 to be the crescendo, right? I don't know. It's weird because I would say that Razageth phase 3 was not harder than phase 2, but it didn't feel that way. It still felt very heroic to get there and finish it out.
Yeah, this is essentially what I'm saying. I think Sylvanas, the first 2 phases as the exact same, but the third phase as like Razageth's third phase, which is that amped up, or like Laerdar's third phase, right? That amped up, you're losing space and there's mechanics happening and all you need to do is finish the fight kind of thing. Sylvanas got to phase 3 and it felt like there's still half the boss left, which was true, right?
Sure.
When you got to phase 3 on Sylvanas, right? You had to do these 4 different platforms. And I don't think that there was that like ramping, like there was that like ramping feeling, right? But you can imagine a version of things where she's in the center of like the Arbiter's chamber, and she's putting black goop on the ground every 10 seconds, and you have 60 seconds to DPS the rest of the way, and the black goop just keeps like walling you in closer and closer and closer. That's probably a version of the Sylvanas probably enjoy, but like that turns the third phase into like a burn, execute, killer fast sort of phase, whereas it was kind of its own long drawn out thing. That was to me was the
so I see what you're saying, and I think that would work. I think you could solve it either way. I think phase 2, like if phase 2 wasn't so fucking long, and it felt like you could die for like stupid reasons. So
or also Sylvanas, the other thing is the good thing about Fyr'alath phase 2 is he's not health walled, right?
Yes,
time walled.
Yes.
So if you could put damage on Sylvanas that like made your phase 3 shorter and easier, that would be a huge difference in my opinion.
Yeah, it happens twice, right? Phase 1 and phase 2 are like that. Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Anyway, we're talking about Tindral.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with you about like the distance moved things. I think that part is interesting. I actually kind of think that in my perfect world, I sort of wish Fyr'alath was this phase, moving between the different the different platforms. I don't know, it's like it's hard to like design a boss. I understand what they were like kind of going for, and it's neat that he's a druid, he's using his flight form, all this other sort of
and
stuff.
We get to do dragon riding, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know, there's something about Fyr'alath just being in that one chamber. It's Fyr'alath being in that one chamber is not so bad. It reminds me of Final Destination in sort of like Smash, where it's just like, okay, you just have a big open room. It's fine. You whatever. Who cares? But like I think that there's like interesting stuff you could have done with that, in the same way that like the Vault of the Incarnates did interesting shit with having get blowing you onto the different platforms, and you're doing all these mechanics on the individual platforms coming back to the main platform stuff.
Yeah. No, like I said, Tindral might be my personal favorite, but we should do a full discussion of Fyr'alath now. Yeah.
Yeah. I quite like Fyr'alath. I think Fyr'alath is my third favorite boss in the raid. I think it's Igira the Cruel, Laerdar, Fyr'alath, right? The stuff I like about Fyr'alath is there's a couple of just like interesting little pieces of Fyr'alath that are like fun and compelling. The blaze lines are so great. I love the blaze lines. These are the kind of mechanic that like, I have talked before about how sometimes WoW will introduce new mechanics and then it just kind of gets added to the feature set for forever, and you constantly refer back to them as saying, oh, it's like blank from blank, right? Oh, I feel like that's what blaze lines are gonna do. Oh, it's like blaze lines from Fyr'alath, right? Oh, it's like massacre lines from Denathrius, right? We just like intuit and understand these mechanics this way because it's so iconic to the boss. And if you are going to introduce sort of essentially kind of a new evergreen mechanic to a boss fight, that I think it's correct to do it on the on like the final boss, right? I want to be saying, oh, it's like Blaze Lines on Farak 6 years from now, right? When we're pulling fucking whatever Iridacrot as part of the last Titan or whatever the World Soul Saga ends on, all that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think he's my third favorite too, behind Larry and Tindril. Or Tindril and Larry, I guess in that order. I there was like a bunch of like little optimizations that I loved being able to do. Right, like the one in particular for me is like every time he does like the thing where he bounces you up, I could like transcendence transfer myself back down and be like, I got an extra half second of uptime. Fuck you, right? Like, or like
yeah, I did the same thing with Heroic Leap. Love that.
Or like being able to use Touch of Death on the bad spirits. Fair amount of skill, like you said, with the Blaze Lines is fun. I will say that my personal experience on her kill was a little soured because I didn't see like the errant fire tornado and it killed my seed. I was like, no, I got to do the seeds. This is the thing I'm good at, and I screwed it up and it felt bad. But that's
yeah.
That's
it's even worse because the errant fire tornado came from somebody who had it came from my friend Jade, who hadn't progressed the boss with us at all, and didn't understand the boss fights intuitively, but she's obviously a really insane healer, and just like puts out the incredible numbers to like healing bosses and stuff like that. And so I also found that to be a minorly souring thing for that reason, right?
Yep.
But
I hate to admit this, but there are these moments where it's like, I actually hope the raid wipes because I want to be there for the kill, right? I want to be like there at the end for the kill. But we got the kill, so it's not super important. But yeah, no, I think I think the thing that the phase 3 does is like, it's like you still have to get, if you get through it with enough people, it feels like it's like very, very doable. It's just about executing and pulling it out. And maybe that's the distinguishing feature where it's like maybe not quite so mechanics heavy, but like it still like has like an execution requirement. Like you still have to like do the thing. I don't know. I feel like if I sat down and thought about it for a long time, I could like dial in exactly what makes that kind of balance work, right? Because like we both agree that Sylvanas misses it, and that like Fyr'alath and Razageth hit it pretty well.
Yeah, I definitely think so. It also hangs together in a really like good way. This is a very this is a boss that puts me in the moment in a way that other Sarkareth kind of failed at this, in my opinion, right? Like Sarkareth was like a boss that I don't know, like there's cool stuff in Sarkareth, and I like a lot of how the mechanics play out individually, right? Like famously, my AOTC Sarkareth kill happened because I made a hero play, right? Where I realized a raid wiping mechanic was coming. I instantly went to the downstairs phase to dodge it. I got a bunch of orbs to get myself essentially a mini lust effect for 40 seconds, and I came up and I executed the boss, right? When we were in that bleed out position where there's like one tank, 2 healers, and 3 DPS or whatever. Like that was just enough to like juice us over the line before the next kind of raid wiping mechanic came out. And like that's a fun story, but that's all just happening on a mechanics level, right? And it's not like Sarkareth himself had anything to kind of do or to set up this level of this level of mechanics, right? Whereas Farak, all of it felt really thematic and tied to him, right? He's constantly burning fire damage that hits the whole raid just because he's burning so hot. He's putting these dots that are growing in intensity on, right? And they have to be dispelled off about as fast as your healers can hit the dispel button, right? He's taunting everybody in the room all the whole time, right? And just has these voice lines. All that stuff is like killer when it comes to Fareg. And helps it all kind of, I guess, hang together. And then I think like the seeds phase, the seeds are a mechanic from Mythical Andras that made their way down to normal in a way that I thought was really interesting. Mythical Andras also had a mechanic that was you had to hold an orb and not get hit by any mechanics. If you got hit by any mechanics, it goes off, wipes the raid, basically. The seeds are just bad enough when they get hit that it's like a wipe, but you can recover, right? Which is what happened to us. In like it was bad. A bunch of people died. A bunch of seeds got destroyed, right? But we recovered, right? And like that's the sweet spot where it didn't feel like one person fucked up and therefore the raid wipes. It felt like like one person fucked up, but we could pull it back, and we did, and we were able to like kill the boss. Um, I also just think the seeds phase is like deceptively easy. This is true for both Razageth and Fyr'alath. The final phase has to be deceptively easy, but it has to be easy but feel hard, right?
Yeah.
I think that outside of I don't know, just outside of kind of all of the rest of it, if you were to show me that phase just on its own, I would probably say this is like the easiest phase, right? That the actual hard phase is having people not kill the spirits or whatever. But yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I mean, I also think part of the difficulty there is like getting everybody to phase 3, like having enough DPS to like get stuff done within within your seeds amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I also love the interaction with the spirits. I think the spirits were really cleverly designed. They were designed in a similar sort of way to the Lairdar thing as a challenge. It was always phrased incorrectly, right? People said, "Oh, you have to heal the spirits to full so that they become immune to the damage." No, that's not true, right? The spirits can take the damage, and that's okay. But like the thing, so for instance, a blaze line on a set of fresh spirits will nuke all of them, and that's bad. That's the kind of thing where like one person fucking up can wipe the raid. But a blaze line on a group of spirits that are in the middle of the room and the healers have been good and they've been healing the spirits a bunch probably won't actually kill the spirits. It'll drop their health pretty low, right? And you'll have to heal them up again, and that's bad or whatever, but like that's kind of like recoverable. And to me, that is like a perfect sort of design, right? Where like one person's mistake can be covered by another person's hero. And Fyr'alath just has a lot of that, so I think that's what makes Fyr'alath fun. Also, obligatorily Fyr'alath has like the coolest, best loot.
Yeah.
The Blossom of Amirdrassil is like the best healing trinket. The Augury thing. He has a cheat. It's not quite a cheat death trinket. It's sort of a cheat death trinket for tanks. All that stuff is like interesting and compelling. And it almost kind of makes me think that I sort of think loot has been squished a little. I have sort of like I don't know. I have nascent thoughts on this, and I'm kind of letting them percolate at the moment. But kind of my feeling is that the nature of WoW loot has changed because like the underlying systems have changed in such a way that I just don't care about 99% of the loot out there. I care way more about loot in Castle Nathria than I did in like um uh Amirdrassil,
Still.
and I feel like it's like the converter tags into this. The upgrade system tags into this. There's just like a couple of little pieces of this where kind of access to loot has gotten better in ways that people have asked for, but that access has kind of narrowed the effective loot pool to be, oh, a couple of trinkets in the raid. You got pips, you got the Fyr'alath trinkets,
And Mog.
and you got and Mog. You know what I mean? It's just like I don't care about any the rest of it, right? Or like weapons with cantrips. You care about, right? Like Urktos has claws that have a cantrip. Is that right?
The claw, the what's it called, the fist weapon. I don't think it has a. It has a yeah.
I might be thinking about something else.
It has an equip. It has an on hit effect. It's like a chance on hit effect for the Thorn Spirit, but it's not a cantrip per se.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, just a weapon with an extra effect, or like an item that has an extra effect on top of its stats. Something that I think of as like a cantrip.
Okay,
right?
yeah. So Thorn Collar has that then. Yeah, it's passive.
Yeah, and then Fyr'alath has a couple of weapons that are cantrip weapons. Like polearm. And the one-handed axe that he drops, that kind of stuff. And then obviously the legendary. I got the legendary pretty quick. I was very lucky when it came to the legendary. I had about I think it was like a 10% chance to get the legendary, and I got it. I love the legendary. I think the legendary is like fun. People have been complaining about the legendary. I honestly feel like I'm about to talk to people about, or I'm hearing people talk to me about the legendary the way that people talked about like Legion artifacts. So I feel like, I don't know, that's interesting or funny or something.
Yeah. I have not been paying attention to legendary since I can't use it.
Are you gonna go hard for the legendary when you like? Are you gonna care about it? Do you think? Like, let's say they drop like a two-handed polearm or something for monks and survival hunters and bears or whoever else.
When would that if it were to happen, would I do it? Probably. That's like the type of thing I would care about. Um, yeah. No. So something on the loot side that like has felt bad to me specifically. This is a weird thing to say. Is like Mythic Plus being so accessible this season, but my like not having any particular desire to do Mythic Plus, or at least putting the time to like actually do Mythic Plus, has felt bad to me because it's like I can never catch up on loot, right? Like even people who I perform better in raid are starting to like outstrip me at points and are like better eye level than me because Mythic Plus is so accessible. I have other things I want to do with my time. That feels less good to me. I don't know if that's like, I'm not here to say that that's wrong, right? Like, I think it's fine maybe that like I feel not so quite so good about that. Like maybe if I had a way to do it in the things that I like to do, I would feel better about it, but I don't know if that's the right thing either because then that would, like, the things I do are like PvE content and rating. And so if you make PvE content capable of getting high level loot, then that like just makes it too accessible, I think.
It's happening in War Within, right?
Really?
They have these delves or whatever. Yeah, because the idea is that there's going to be a third track in the vault. So you're going to have raid, you're going to have Mythic Plus, and then you're going to have the third track in the vault is going to be open world content.
Ooh.
And the idea is that delves are going to be sort of like Horrific Visions or something like that. Horrific Visions was a piece of content you could do it as a group, but you could also do it solo. And it would reward you gear up to heroic level gear. So I think, I don't know, maybe that's kind of War Within. We'll have to see.
I would say like the problem is in heroic level gear, right? Like I'm almost max level for heroic. The problem is because like Mythic Plus gear is like eminently doable, is like the thing that like puts me behind the 8 ball a little bit.
Again, I think this has been, in my opinion, this has been a problem since, I don't even know, maybe middle of Shadowlands, right? The reality is, I think heroic raid is tuned for a comp like ours, where you have a group of people who take Mythic Plus pretty seriously. I mean, granted, we take Mythic Plus way more seriously than the average players, right?
Sure.
Like, obviously, I was top 100 U.S. Arms Warriors, right? Or I am top 100 U.S. Arms Warriors. But like, the idea that I can go into Mythic Plus and I can get Myth Track gear and I can end up with a bunch of 489 pieces by, putting real time and effort into Mythic Plus. But then on raiding, I'm not Mythic raiding. I'm just coming into the heroic raid with my Myth Track gear. And at this point, I don't even need heroic raid for it. And I just completely like, there's a version of things where the heroic raid is tuned for heroic raiders, right? Where everybody is item level for, I don't even know what it is, like 471 or something like that. Just like a low and then we sort of like build up to sort of whatever. But I feel like that's not what happens, right? You have me, Lokix, Drupal, Dave, right? This kind of core set of people, even people like Raylana, Lou, right? Like Keys done, coming in with pretty powerful characters. I complained about this maybe on Razageth, right? Hold on, maybe I can. I feel like the average item level on our Fyr'alath kill is going to be kind of wild.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be one of the lower level people in that kill. And I think to your like, I want to be clear. I don't think the problem is people like you and your Mythic Plus group outpacing me. I think the problem is people who I want to say it's a problem, but like like people who do Mythic Plus fairly casually being able to get that level of gear is the thing that feels bad to me because I have to go study and do Mythic Plus at some level, which I don't particularly want to do in order to get to that level. And there's no other way to do it, right? Because like I can't casually Mythic raid, and I can't get the gear through any sort of PvE type thing.
Yeah. And obviously, you could do the Mythic Plus thing, right? Like with us or whatever, but that just adds so much more time to like a schedule where you don't necessarily want to be doing that on WoW, right? Which is enough. The average item level for our Fyr'alath kill was item level 479, right? Which is just, I don't know, it's really high, I guess. To be fair, Farak does drop higher item level gear. He drops item level 480 gear, which is like nice or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. There's just like this thing where I'm just like looking at the item levels of our top 5 people, right? It was 488, 486, 488, 486, and 481, right? All top 4 of these players are item level 480 or higher, right? Even low kicks is 486, right? As a tank. Jade was there healing at 485, right? It's just like, man, I don't know how you deal with that. I don't know what the I don't know. I don't know what the way you sort of figure that out is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of it for me is like, it was like, I don't know. I think maybe part of the way you could solve it is if you like gave some access to the top level upgrade stones somehow, right? Like, slightly better rate than like 90 kind of heroic level stones for 15. Because like that's the thing maybe I'd be willing to do is like grind out like those stones and like be like I can I can never get quite all the way up there, but I can upgrade my like my champion tier gear into the stratosphere level gear, and that won't feel so bad.
Or
but...
you would think like I think the thing that I would want like that 90-15 thing only opens up once you get everything to item level 476 or something, and it's just sort of like, or maybe it's like 483.
It's 476.
No,
I just
it's
got
476.
it. Yeah.
And it's just like, but the thing is, it brings everything up to item level 476, and then for heroic track here, you have to clear that threshold on pieces of gear that kind of don't matter, right? So for instance, your bracers, which contribute, the amount of flight zones, or I'm sorry, the amount of crests it takes to upgrade a weapon and upgrade your bracers are the same amount of crests, 15, right? But your weapon is so much more valuable to your DPS than that hypothetically speaking, I would be happy to sit there with 460 bracers and a 483 weapon, because the 30 aspect crest as 180 worm crest or whatever, it's like 2 full clears of the raid, is I don't know, like that, like I would be willing to sort of like make that trade. I don't know, it's complicated. I like the loot system now. I think it's important that people have this to upgrade. It solves a lot of the issues that we had with kind of like the first boss is worthless, all this other sort of stuff. But boy, man, oh man, it really, like I said, narrows that pool. I think there's something here, but I don't really know what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that's fair. We have spent an hour and a half talking about the raid, and do you have anything in particular about your week you want to talk about? Because like,
I guess Helldivers is good.
Yeah.
I have deep Helldivers brainworms. I just started playing Helldivers yesterday. I woke up, I played Helldivers, and then it was 10 hours later. I was like, oh my God. So yeah, I don't know. It's like, that's kind of my week, I guess, is Helldivers.
So it's weird because I had a similar experience, except it was I woke up and I started playing the story in Yemeni Christians in CK3 to try out the new X pack, and it was 10 hours later, and I was swearing at the Bedouins for taking my father's land. So I think some of the stuff is from the last expansion, which I didn't play a ton of, but there's some very cool improvements, right? Like when you go on a pilgrimage, it used to be you like went on a pilgrimage, and then like some time would pass, and eventually you'd like be like, and you went on a pilgrimage, and here's some piety or whatever, right? Now you have to plan it out. There's risks along the way. There's a ton of events that happen along the way, and there was some of it, but like it's like a whole like event now, and the Grand Hunts are the same way. I haven't done a legend yet, which is a big new feature. I went through some plagues. Plagues by themselves are not super interesting. It's just kind of like, well, you can't do things for a while because the bubonic plague is gonna fucking murder everybody, right? I guess there's some like interest in kind of like the decisions you make around it, but it's kind of more like a top level system than it's kind of like an individual decision system. It's been, I've been enjoying it in the same way that I've always enjoyed it. Like I said, the things I'm most impressed with are the newer systems for pilgrimages and kind of other big in-game events where your character actually goes and does something. But there was one other thing I want to talk about since we did Dune 2 last week. I heard on a different podcast a theory about what might be happening, right? I explained to you how in the books in Dune Messiah, Prince Irulan gets really mad and enters into a conspiracy against Paul, right? That's what happens to Dune Messiah. Somebody floated, it's like, well, maybe what they're setting up is in the movie, the next movie, it'll be Chani who enters the conspiracy against Paul because she's against this kind of like whole like, Messiah, kind of like pulling the Freeman into this jihad thing, right? And so they'll switch the roles for them. The Erlan will be the loyal one, and Chani will be the betrayer in the movie, which would be interesting. Obviously, deviation from the book, so maybe not my favorite, but I think that could be like an interesting way to go with things, at least, because at least makes it more kind of its own thing. Yeah, so that was the only thing I thought that was the big thing that I heard that I thought was cool that I wanted to share.
Hey, one other thing I want to mention is I'm running do you remember the Stalingrad campaign pitch me we did a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah.
I'm gonna essentially run that game as a mini campaign. I pitched it as I was like, we'll do 6 sessions, right? And the funny thing is that I'm going back and I'm updating an old. Do you remember a long time ago, 10 years ago, I had a campaign setting. Like it was called Saran, the Empire. There were the Imperial races, the Dark races, all that stuff. I'm running it in that campaign setting. So nice. I have been going through. I've written like 50 pages of like lore, or whatever, because I'm changing some of the stuff. It's less about racism now, more about like to me, the hook of the game now is about the Industrial Revolution, right? But as taking place through the discovery of sort of these power crystals, right? And I've borrowed a bunch of lore. I've injected a bunch of stuff or whatever. I had sort of vague thoughts in my head that Skaven existed, but now that I'm like a deep Warhammer junkie or whatever, I have decided to fully port Skaven, Beastmen, and Lizardmen into like the campaign setting, and nice. Just because like I just want to do cool shit with them, or whatever. But anyway, yeah, so we're running this game called Kovalgrad, where the Leonin from the Leonin hierarchy are attacking this dwarven furnace city of Kovalgrad. And the players are sort of like dealing, like they are getting conscripted into the Imperial Legion, and they have to do this like really like dense urban fighting. I'm very excited, especially because one of the things about this like Industrial Revolution shit is that I had canonized sort of like tanks, and like I don't know, like mechanized stuff with these things. I called them onulus or whatever, that were like, kind of like magic constructs or whatever. And so you get to actually do some of that like World War II stuff with like airship bombing and all this other sort of stuff. You have ornithopters that could be like fighter plays. I'm very excited to kind of like dig into it. The story itself, as it has kind of coalesced, is is a little bit smaller in scope than what we had initially sort of like pitched in that thing. But it's just interesting that we've finally gotten to a point where I'm in a position to actually play one of these games.
Nice. Awesome. That's awesome. Sounds super exciting.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to fucking report in.
Yeah. You have anything else you want to talk about, or should we punch out?
Oh yeah, we can punch. Listen, we can punch out. We can go fight for democracy.
See, yeah,
that's what I want to do.
So if you'd like to email us about any of the things you talked about on this podcast, you can email us at derpsgames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsgames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/derpsgames or youtube.com/derpsgames. These go out live. Rate, review us wherever you find podcasts. All the links will be down in the description. Buddy, you have anything else you're looking to promote?
The one thing I'm looking to promote, honestly, I feel like everybody who watches the podcast, it won't matter, but I just want to say for the record is that we're going to PAX East.
Yes.
Okay. If you guys are also heading to PAX East in 2 weeks, Mango and I will be there. I will be there in a work capacity. Mango will be there in a fun capacity. Yeah, I guess.
Maybe if I can convince Monik to show up, maybe in a semi kind of sort of work capacity, but not really.
Maybe.
Say hi if you see us. You'll find Buddy at the Aquapark Games booth. Honestly, you'll probably find me at the Aquapark Games booth quite a lot because I enjoy playing their games and whatnot.
There's another thing that I think is going to be so addicting for you this year, because it's what is it? It's Ever After Falls, it's Sorry We're Closed, and it's Grime. Obviously you've already played Grime, but Ever After Falls, I don't know. Do you ever play like Stardew Valley? Do you ever do any of these farming?
So I don't, but I think that my girlfriend might be interested, so I will make her play that.
Interesting. Yeah, there's co-op, so listen, you can do split screen co-op, which is very fun.
Yeah, so I'm very proud of her, and this is not very Stardew Valley, but it took her a while, but she beat the Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3 COD campaigns.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is like she is like so confused by like dual stick control. So she's like her finally getting a handle on that is a pretty big moment. One day she just texted me, it's like, I get it now. I spent all day playing Call of Duty and I didn't get anything done. It's like, you understand my life. But yeah, but with that, I will say until next time, dear listeners, we should have one more podcast before PAX.
Yeah, true. Next week we will be podcasting as normal.
Yeah.
Listen, send in your topic ideas. I don't know.
Yeah, we have a request for Rebel Moon, but I don't know if I'll be able to watch it before then.
At this point, we should just do Rebel Moon because it's 2 parts and the second part comes in April. So we should
Okay.
just do Rebel Moon on the double, like the double wide in it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If you have good topic ideas, let us know. Yeah. All right. Well, again, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.